Welcome to this Wisel Excel VBA tutorial. In this part of our series on writing SQL for Excel files, we're going to look at how to consolidate multiple worksheets using derived table subqueries. So we'll begin by looking at how to append multiple worksheets into a single list using a union all query. We'll then take the results of that union all query and create a derived table subquery so that we can then group the results of the entire list. We'll look at how we can add aggregates and add grand total rows, and then we'll use another derived table subquery at the end of the video so that we can sort our grand totals into the appropriate place in the final results. So let's get started. If you've watched any of the previous videos in this series, you'll probably be familiar with the basic setup by now, so feel free to skip to the next chapter of this video, you won't miss anything exciting. Just in case you haven't seen any previous videos in the series, here's a quick look at the basics of how things work. We have a macro-enabled workbook which allows us to run a query by clicking on this button, and when we do that it's going to extract some data from a separate Excel file called Movies. The Movies workbook contains a number of different worksheets with data about films, and we'll talk more about that in the next section of the video. I'll drop a link to download both files in the video description below, so you can feel free to download these and follow along with writing the code with me if you'd like to. A lot of the code that's in the Merge and Consolidate Worksheets workbook relies on Microsoft ActiveX data objects. I'm not going to talk about that much in this video. We've got a separate playlist which covers how to connect to other Excel files. So if you're interested in that, there's a separate playlist called Excel VBA Working with Databases, and there's a bunch of different videos in there. I'd recommend starting with this one, How do I get data from a closed Excel file using VBA, if that's the part you're interested in. Just to show the basics of how things work, if I head back to the Merge and Consolidate workbook, if I hit the Run Query button, it's going to trigger a subroutine called Create SQL Query. And all this does is construct a string representing the select statement we're going to execute. That then gets passed into a separate subroutine called Get Query Results, and this one deals with the complicated stuff such as establishing the connection to the Movies workbook, building the connection string to indicate what type of file it's connecting to, populating a record set with the results of our query, so that's where our query text gets used, and then the rest of the code writes out the data into a separate worksheet in this workbook. So just to show that in action, we'll select these three columns from the Genres 2010 worksheet in the Movies workbook. If we head back to the menu sheet, click the Run Query button, our data gets written out into a new sheet. The aim for this video is to consolidate all of the individual worksheets in the Movies workbook into one single list. So at the moment we have a separate worksheet for each year in the Movies workbook, and on each worksheet we've grouped our films based on the genre they belong to and created some basic aggregates. That pattern's repeated across all of the different sheets, although you can see that there are different genres in each of these yearly sheets. What we want to do is build a single list that shows all of the genres across the full range of years, with the total number of films, total runtime, and any other aggregates we might like to create. We can do a similar thing a little later on to group our data in a different way to show those same aggregates but grouped by year instead. The starting point for both of those final outputs is the continuous list of every single row from each of these sheets put together. So we can do that using a union query, which is something we've covered in a previous video, but just as a quick reminder, let's union all of these worksheets into a single giant list. If we head back to the Visual Basic Editor, I'm going to start by copying that line from my current query, and then I'm going to concatenate a continuation character before pasting in what I've just copied. I'm then going to change the reference to the 2010 worksheet to the 2011 sheet, and then I'm going to add two words to the beginning of this line. I'm going to say union all. As I say, we've covered union and union all in a previous video. The union keyword by itself will remove any duplicates, whereas union all will always return every single row, and that's quite important if we want to get the correct aggregates at the end. So we'll use union all for this example. Then I'm just going to copy and paste everything from the concatenated continuation character and the union all select, and then I'm going to paste that in for 2012, 2013, 2014, 15 and 16. And then a little bit of tidying up just to make sure I'm selecting from the correct worksheets. Shouldn't take too long to do. So there we go, there's the basic starting point, the full list of all the film genres across all the years in one giant table. Just to show the final results, if I head back to the menu sheet and click that Run Query button, we've got all of the rows from all of those sheets all put together into a single list. So at the moment we have a query which returns all of the individual rows that we can subsequently group and aggregate. But in order to make that work, we have to use the results of this query to feed the from clause of another query. So we're going to convert the query we've just written into a derived table subquery. Just to show the absolute basics of how that works, let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor. To convert this into a subquery, we need to start by wrapping a set of round brackets around the entire thing. This is going to get fed into the from clause of an outer query. And in the from clause, every table that you create must have some kind of name. Now, because this is the results of a select statement, the only way to provide a name for that table of results is to assign an alias to the end. So outside of the round brackets, I can say as T, for example. The name of the table doesn't really matter too much. I tend to use the letter T for generic derived tables. What we can then do is wrap another select statement around the outside of this. So I'm going to head up to the top of the query just before that main select statement appears, and then I'm going to begin a new select statement. So I'll say select and then concatenate a continuation character. Just for convenience, I'm going to select every column from that table just as a basic demonstration. So I'm going to use the asterisk to represent every column and then concatenate that with the from keyword. And then the from clause basically consists of everything that we've written here. So I'm just going to indent that one space. The rest of the query can have all of the other parts of a select statement that you know. So if you know the where clause and the order by clause, we can wrap that around the query in the appropriate place. So just as a very quick example, if I concatenated the order by clause to the end of the main outer query, I could say something like this. So order by, and let's order by the name of the genre. So I'll just say T.genre. And I'll need to, of course, wrap that up in some double quotes. Okay, so having done that, if I head back to the menu sheet and I run my query again, I return the full list of all of the results returned by the combination of union queries passed into the from clause of an outer query, and then the results are sorted. Now that we've reached this stage, we can add a group by clause to the outer query to group all of the genres with the same name and then total up the number of films and total up the total runtimes. So back in the Visual Basic Editor, let's change our order by clause into a group by clause. So we're going to group by the genre name in the table that we've generated. That means that we'll also need to place that column name in the select list. So let's copy that T.genre and replace the asterisk there with T.genre. If we then just executed that query again, if we head back to the menu sheet and run that as a quick temporary test, you can see that now we've got a list of just the unique genre names from the combination of all the yearly sheets. So now we can start adding in our aggregates. If we head back to the Visual Basic Editor, let's just copy and paste T.genre. And then on the next line, we're going to add a comma, and then in a sum function, we're going to refer to the number of films. So rather than T.genre, T.number of films. I'll close around brackets for the sum function, and then I'll also want to provide an alias for that column. If I run that query now from the menu sheet, I'll end up with a column which has no name, or a generic name, expression 1001. So let's give that a better name. Let's call that one, well, let's call it number of films, I suppose. I'll just copy the current column name that I'm aggregating and then say as number of films. I can then do the same basic thing to get the sum of total runtime. So let's copy and paste that line and then just refer to the total runtime column instead. So I'll refer to that in two different places. The column that we're summing and then the alias that we'll generate. Okay, so having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet once again, run that query again, and now we've basically got the total number of films and total runtime across all of those yearly sheets in the movies workbook. From this point, we could then include any of the additional columns from the yearly worksheets, such as total nominations and total Oscar wins, simply by including those column names in both the union query and then in the main select list of the outer query. We can also generate our own aggregates, so if we wanted to work out the average runtime of all the films in a particular genre, we could divide the total runtime by the number of films. So let's just add that one in as a slightly better example. Let's copy that last line, the sum of total runtime, and then paste that into the main select list. And then I'm going to divide that by the number of films. So I'm going to copy and paste sum t dot number of films. I'll then provide a different alias for the final column rather than total runtime. Let's call that one average runtime. And then if we head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, we've generated our own aggregate from the aggregates we've summed. We could also apply a sort to the query so we can see the genre with the longest average runtime at the top. Let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor and let's bring back that order by clause that we had. I'm just going to copy and paste my group by clause, paste that in at the end, change the word group by to order by, and then I want to order in descending order of average runtime. Now sadly I can't reference average runtime, I can't reference that alias in the order by clause, but what I can do is reference my expression that generates the value. So I'm going to copy the sum total runtime divided by sum number of films, paste that into the order by clause, and then say that I want that sorted in descending order. So having done that, we can head back to the menu sheet, run the query again, and we've got a nicely sorted list showing that musical films across those different years are the longest on average. If we want to group our data by the year in which the film was released, so we can produce a set of results which looks like this, we need to include in the subquery a column which contains that value for each row from the appropriate sheet, so that we can then group by that value in the end results. So to do that, let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then in the first select statement of the subquery, I'm going to add in a comma, and then I'm just going to put in the number representing the year of the sheet that we're taking that data from. So 2010 for the genre's 2010 sheet. For the first column in the first select statement, I'm going to assign an alias to this as well, otherwise it won't have a name. So I'll call this one as year. And then for each of the other union all select statements, I need to include a value in the same position, which indicates the year that that set of data comes from. There's no need or point to adding an alias to these because they would be ignored anyway. It's only the first select statement's alias which is used to generate the column names. Everything else is then mapped based on the position of columns. So having done that, we can then use our year column to perform our grouping. So in the select statement of the outer query, rather than showing the genre, we can show the year. And then in the group by clause, we can also group by the year. So having done all that, we can head back to the menu sheet, click the Run Query button again, and this time we'll get our data grouped by year, showing the year with the longest average runtime at the top of the list. Now that we have the main query working, we can add a couple of extra bells and whistles. So let's say, for example, we wanted a grand total or a summary row at the bottom of this table to show the total number of films, total runtime, and overall average. To do that, let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and I'm going to start by just removing the entire order by clause temporarily. We'll bring that back a bit later on, but for now we'll get rid of that. To add in a total row, I basically want to union to this query a single row that shows the sum of number of films, sum of runtime, and then sum of runtime divided by sum of number of films. So basically everything that I've done here without the group by clause. I don't think I'd get away with concatenating this into a single statement. You may remember there's a limit of 25 continuations in a single VBA statement. So let's start by copying the entire thing except for the group by clause, and then provide a couple of blank lines below and then paste that in. Now, of course, I don't want to overwrite the existing SQL query. I want to concatenate it to what's already in there. So we'll say SQL query equals SQL query, and then I want not to select something. I want to union all select the entire set of results that I'm about to generate. But of course, I don't want to display the film year. I want to replace the year with some kind of label which describes this extra row. So in some single quotes, I'm going to put in the word summary. You might say total or grand total or something like that. Okay, so having done all that, we could head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, and we'll get our grand summary row sitting at the bottom of that table. If we wanted to change the way our table was grouped, so let's say for example we wanted to go back to grouping by genre, that's nice and easy. The summary row won't change, that will always be the same grand total and grand overall average. So let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and then let's just change in the main select statement, the original one at the top. We'll go back to selecting the t.genre and grouping by t.genre as well. So once we've done that, we can head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, and it will give us the same grand summaries, but this time with the data grouped by genre. Things do become a little more tricky if we'd like to reintroduce our order by clause, but still keep our total row at the bottom of the list. If we head back to the Visual Basic Editor, when you've got a union query, you can only add one single order by clause right at the very end of all of the unioned things. So let's reintroduce our order by clause right at the very bottom. We'll add a continuation character and then add in an order by. And I'm going to sort in descending order of number of films. So we'll say order by and then another continuation character, and then I can refer to the number of films column alias from the first select statement. So let's copy that and then paste that in at the bottom, and we'll go in descending order. Okay, so having done that, if we head back to the menu sheet and we run that query again, we can see that it has indeed sorted in descending order, but of course, because the grand total number of films is bigger than any individual genre, that now sits at the top of our list. One way to get the summary row back down at the bottom again is to add a helper column to affect the sorting. So we've done this in a previous video, but just as a quick recap, let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor. And each of the two select statements in our union is going to receive an extra column. It doesn't really matter where we place this as long as it's in the same place in each of these two queries. I'm going to place this as the first column. It's easier to see that way, I think. So at the start of my select statement, I want all of the individual genre rows to have a lower number than, or a lower value than, the value I'm going to assign to the grand total. So I'm just going to assign a generic value of 0 to the first select statement. I'll give it an alias. I'll call it sort column or helper column, something like that. And then making sure I've concatenated a continuation character and added a comma to the beginning of the next line. Then to do the same thing for the union all, I just need to add in another column. I don't need to provide an alias for this. I just want it to have a higher value than the 0 that I applied to the individual genres. So I can then concatenate a continuation character and add in a comma at the beginning of the next line. So having done that, I can now reference that sort column in my order by clause. If I sort first of all by the sort column and then in descending order of number of films, I'll get the results that we want. So let's just copy and paste the sort column name so I avoid mistyping that. Paste that into the order by clause. I'll go in ascending order for that, followed by a comma and then number of films in descending order. Okay, so having done all that, it won't look beautiful just yet, but if we head back to the menu sheet and run that query again, we've now got the films or the genres sorted in descending order of number of films with our grand summary row right down at the bottom where we wanted it. Now, although this is a fairly minor problem, it would be nice to be able to get rid of the sort column from our final output. In a previous video we did this by adding a bit of extra VBA code just to delete the first column once we'd finished writing out the results, but I think we can be a little more clever in this video. What we're going to do is take the query that produces this entire table of results and convert that again into a derived table subquery. we're then going to pass the set of results into an outer query, and in the outer query we're going to select only the columns we want to display in the results, sorting by the sort column but without displaying it. So the final result looks a little complicated, but let's head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and we'll take the same basic approach we took in the previous example to convert this entire query into a derived table. So I'm going to start at the beginning of the SQL query. I'm going to start by opening a set of round brackets in front of the select statement. Then, heading all the way down to just before the order by clause, we'll apply the order by clause to the results of the outer query. So I'm not going to order anything just at this point. I'm just going to close a set of round brackets at the end of that from clause where we've said as t. And then I want to assign an alias, I'll need to assign an alias to the results of that derived table subquery. So I'm going to say as t1. All of my table or alias names are as inventive as that. t1, as I've already used t. Now I need to wrap a select statement around the outside of this. So everything we've just wrapped up in some round brackets is going to feed the from clause of another query. So above that first select statement, I'm going to add a new line, and I'm going to start in a nice simple way. I'm going to say select star asterisk from, and then just concatenate that to the rest of the query. So all of this part here is the from clause. It might even be worthwhile indenting all of those lines just to try to indicate in some way that that's a nested query. And likewise, all of these lines here are also part of the subquery. Probably not entirely necessary, but just to try to indicate somehow which columns we're referencing in which individual tables, I'm going to add the alias t1.sort column and then t1.number of films to the order by clause at the bottom. Now at the moment this won't quite solve our problem, but I just wanted to check that I've got all the syntax correct for the derived table subquery. So let's head back to the main menu sheet and run that query again and just check that we do indeed get the correct list of results in the correct order. So that's great. All we need to do now is make sure that we don't include the sort column in the main outer query that selects the results. So what we can do here is head back to the Visual Basic Editor, and using the column aliases that we've got, we're going to select all the columns except for the sort column. So rather than select asterisk, we're going to say t1.genre, and then a comma, and then t1 dot, and I'm going to copy and paste here rather than write all these out and risk mistyping them. t1 dot total runtime, and finally t1 dot average runtime. And it might be worthwhile tidying this set of results up a little bit. I'm just going to take the from clause down to a separate line just to make that a little easier to read. Again, ideally in the real world, I'd have these individual column names written on separate lines. I'll let you tidy that part up yourself. So, having done all of that, if we finally head back to the menu sheet one more time and run that query, we get our final list of results in the order we want, but without that extra helper column displayed. So there we go, there's the basics of using derived table subqueries to consolidate multiple worksheets into a single list. The basic principle is fairly straightforward, although it does lead to some quite long, difficult to read queries, but the basic principle is nesting a select statement inside the from clause of an outer select statement. And in this video we've done that up to 3 levels. We have 3 total levels of select statements all put together to generate our final results. So hope you found that one useful. Thanks very much for watching as always, and we'll see you next time.